Hello everybody, my name is Tristan, welcome back to L-Space. I'm going to be talking a little quieter today because my partner is still asleep in the other room, hoping that I don't wake him up. Hopefully I can adjust the volume later to make sure that you can actually hear me, and also that the air conditioning does not drown out my voice. Anyway, so today I am doing just another little reading wrap-up of this last week. I finished 2 books, or I guess it's really since my last reading wrap-up that I'm doing, and I've finished 2 books and started 3 more. One of which I think I will be done with soon, but we'll see. So the first one I mentioned in a different reading wrap-up that I had started. I finished In Tongues by Thomas Grattan, and this was one that I picked up for the Alstora bookstore, Eric Servini's Very Gay Book Club. And I was curious about the book club because it highlights queer authors and just in general seems to be a little bit more the kind of literature I like to read as far as book clubs and book subscriptions go, because I had let go my book of the month and Aardvark book club book subscriptions just because I was kind of getting inundated with books that I wasn't actually that interested in reading. So I'm happy that I started this one. So this is about a young man named Gordon who moves to New York City kind of on a whim, and he gets involved as a dog walker and begins walking dogs for a rich, older gay couple. Philip and Nicola are the two old queens that he gets involved with. So on the back it says that one of the reviews are like the cats are playing. He becomes like a personal assistant to the older men from the art world, but we will watch as the sexual, ethical, and monetary inequality turn dark. And from that little snippet, as well as the sort of lead up to where you think that's going to happen, it almost feels like it's going to have Saltburn energy, and I felt that it ended up turning in a very different direction. I've heard it described as having Saltburn energy, so I had repeated that because that's also kind of the energy that it was giving, but that is not at all how the book continues. The book does indeed have it does indeed deal with monetary and class inequality, especially when you're dealing with these 2 very wealthy art dealers, basically, and them sort of taking advantage of this younger, pretty low-class person who doesn't have a good support system, and the sort of fallout of all of that. But I would say that so don't go in expecting that it's going to take a twisted turn. It is going to take more of just this is a more standard contemporary fiction story. Cats again. But I don't want you to think that I didn't like this, because I loved this book. I felt that the prose was really engaging. I thought that Grattan did a really good job of really bringing to life New York City, and also it's interesting because this is, I think, the only book that I've read set in New York City, set kind of in the time around 9/11, September 11, 2001, and it does reference that crisis in the book at one point. But what this really is about is Gordon and his friendship with Phillip, who is one of the pair of the elderly gay couple, and sort of the development and eventual crumbling of that friendship, and then of course like the overall resolution of it at the very end. And I felt that it was a very touching book because of that. I don't think we see a lot of platonic friendships between young gay men and older gay men in literature, at least not ones that have more of, I guess, a healthy undertone to them. Obviously, things go a little bit awry in this one, but overall, I felt that their relationship was really fun to witness and to watch develop and just sort of be. Gordon is a very likable protagonist, and I felt that Philip was also a very interesting and likable person in sort of a little bit of a curmudgeon-y way in some ways. He's nowhere like Ova in A Man Called Ova. If you've read that one, it's nothing like that at all. He's a lot more like severe and kind of austere at the beginning, and just kind of takes warming up to. But anyway, the characters in this are fantastic. I think the only thing that I wish would have been a little different is the relationship with the friendship and the relationship that Gordon has with his roommates. I think that could have been explored a little more, given a little bit more time to breathe, and kind of more time with her. I think with her and I think it's Janice and Meredith. I think that we just could have seen a little bit more from them, but overall, I really, really enjoyed this book. Also, I think just more dogs. I mean, you get a lot of dogs, but I think the dogs aren't really characters where they could have been, but that's just a personal preference. It's not, I don't think that that's like a failing of the book by any means. So yeah, that was In Tongues by Thomas Grattan. I, again, very much enjoyed this book and thought that it was a great entry point for me to enter into this book subscription. I'm gonna give it a few more months to see if it's really gonna be, worth my time and my money, but so far, starting strong. Cool. The next book that I picked up was one that I had started like months ago and had just not prioritized, basically, and that was Blackouts by Justin Torres. So I was almost 100 pages into this when I sort of soft DNF'd it. I think there was just some things that were coming out that really grabbed my attention and were things that I was more interested in. So it's just kind of like a place and time thing. But I enjoyed the book when I picked it up. I enjoyed the book when I was reading it. And then when I finished it, I loved it. I thought it's a really fascinating book. And Justin Torres is a professor at UCLA, and I actually want to go to UCLA to get my PhD in English, so the prospect of like working with him would be pretty cool, especially after reading this. I thought there were so many layers to this with regards to narrative style and sort of multimedia presentation of things, multimedia presentation of the story. I think people could easily describe this as an experimental novel because of the way it employs photographs and excerpts from psychological studies that have been blacked out and things like that. I can show you an example. I mean, just like the inside covers, a pretty good example. But I would kind of refute that. I don't actually think that Torres was experimenting with anything. I think he knew very well what he was doing. I don't think that this is an experiment. I think this is just simply I think that this is conceived as it was intended. I don't think that he was trying to see if something was going to work. I think that when he crafted this, it was very much a perfectly thought out idea that came forth in the form that it is. So this follows our protagonist named Nene, who is not really, he's an unnamed protagonist, unnamed person who is just referred to as Nene by a person named Juan Gay, who is the sort of, who is sort of the self-appointed steward of the work of Jan Gay, who was, well, actually, it's more than likely pronounced Jan Gay, because it references it's kind of the Swedish version of John, but because it's a woman, it's easy to pronounce it as Jan, right? So anyway, so this is all about kind of piecing together the lost narrative of this sexual variance study that Jan Gay did about kind of just firsthand experiences and firsthand accounts of lesbians and gays in the 1930s. And it was eventually kind of hijacked by a straight male doctor who's, you know, just kind of going to mine the study for his own purposes. And so and eventually, like, what happened was a lot of the study was redacted because it was deemed obscene, basically. And so this book definitely plays on that theme of, you know, a very disjointed narrative that is trying to be pieced together to form a singular, cohesive story, and that's a lot of what happens in here. There's a lot of sort of, it's a collage of moments that is being put together, and I think that it is just so interesting to watch as things unfold, and you learn a little bit more about Juan and Nene and their relationship, and I think this is just a book that you kind of have to experience in order to really get. It's hard to explain it without, you know, giving too much away, or like really taking away the pleasure of solving the puzzle of this book. And that is another thing I'll say about this book, is that it is definitely confusing in the beginning, and it's one that makes the reader pose a lot of questions, but I also feel like it rewards its readers who persevere and who continue on and actually put in the work to try to understand. It's a very rewarding read, especially when you get to the ending. I think it's just a fascinating book overall, and this is one that I am definitely going to be returning to a few times, because it's one that I have a feeling is going to benefit a lot from a reread. So that is Blackouts by Justin Torres, and this also won the National Book Awards last year, I believe. Last year or the year before. So anyway, critically acclaimed, obviously. Okay, so I recently read what is translated as Lie With Me by Philippe Besson, which is he's a French author, French queer author. So I was intending to, I think I'm going to probably try to read him down to zero. I'm just going to read all of his books. And so I picked up L'arrière-saison, which basically translates to like late autumn, or like late fall. And I haven't actually gotten that far in this to really give you a good idea of what it's about, because also the back of the book doesn't really give you a good idea of what it's about either. The thing that surprised me about this is that this is a book written in French by a French author that takes place on Cape Cod, and like partially in Boston, which is where I live. So that's a little bit weird for me. I did not intend to pick this book up for any reason. I honestly just kind of picked it up because I liked the title and I liked the cover, and I just wanted to read more of Besson's work. So I'll give you more thoughts on this later. I also don't know if it's overtly queer. It could be, we'll see. But basically I think that the overall theme of this book is kind of just decline and entropy, perhaps you could say, because it's, you know, late fall as things are sort of coming to a close, and there are some lines in here that are hinting towards maintaining that theme throughout. So that is L'arrière-saison by Philippe Besson, otherwise could be translated as late autumn. I don't know if this has an English translation. If it does, it will appear here. So when I did my June Pile of Possibilities, my sort of Pride Month Possibilities book, TBR, I said that I was going to pick up Hours on Juneteenth because I've mentioned that Juneteenth kind of gets swallowed up by Pride Month in a lot of ways, and it's one that, at least on a lot of queer booktubers, queer booktubers, Juneteenth doesn't get a lot of attention. And so I wanted to make a point of reading something for myself that reflected the spirit of the holiday. I had the day off, so I spent a decent part of it reading this book. And this book ended up being kind of a perfect book for reading on Juneteenth because it really interrogates kind of what freedom means. And so it's all about a conjure woman named Saint who destroys plantations and frees slaves through various kinds of magic, which is pretty cool. And then she creates a town that is magically protected from the outside world that is called Ours, where the freed enslaved people can come and exist freely and safely. And sort of this idea of this sort of separation of freedom and safety is a very interesting theme that is explored in this. The language and the writing in this book is so good, and it's fascinating the way that Philip Williams writes and describes things and just really plays with language. He's very playful in his narration, and it is a pretty good testament to show that the African American community in the United States is basically one of the biggest and most, I guess we'll say, productive groups of linguistic innovators of the English language. And this is certainly proof of that. Philip Williams is extremely talented at playing with language and, again, innovating with its form and its structure and everything. So I am thoroughly enjoying this book. I made it through almost 100 pages of this on Juneteenth itself, but I will be picking it up again, but I wanted to make sure that I finished another book that I am also working on getting through to wrap up sort of my Pride Month stuff. So this I will probably finish in July. But this, I can't recommend this enough, just from like the almost 100 pages that I've read of this. I can't recommend it enough. It's also a big book, that's why I dropped it. So the last book that I'm going to talk about is one that has been weighing on my mind for a long time, and I am so excited and so glad that I finally picked it up for my Pride Month reads, and it was Vulgar and It Was Beautiful by Jack Lowery. And as you can see from the subline, it's how AIDS activists use art to fight a pandemic. And this is just a fascinating book. It's written very engagingly. It's one that you can really feel like you're there during the time of the AIDS crisis, and like you feel very close to all of the activists and the way that they are organizing and planning demonstrations and basically like propaganda, and using propaganda to fight the pandemic. So what this book does is really tells the story of Grand Fury, which is the sort of, again, propaganda wing of ACT UP during the AIDS crisis, and they are the ones who produced a lot of the posters and slogans and everything that is widely associated with the AIDS activist movement, ACT UP being the primary movement from there. And I'll put some examples here, but there's one like Silence Equals Death, Read My Lips, Kissing Doesn't Kill, and all of those things were conceived of and distributed by Grand Fury in kind of a guerrilla art posting campaign, and it's just really fascinating the way that they use not only print media, but also performance art and all of that. So I cannot recommend this one enough if you're wanting to learn more about the AIDS epidemic in America, the AIDS pandemic around the world, and how the queer community basically took it into their own hands, took their survival into their own hands, and fought tooth and nail to get the world to recognize that they deserve to live, that AIDS is not just a gay issue, and that the world really needed to practice good medicine and not really worry so much about morality. But yeah, this is a fascinating book, and I think that it does a really good job of bringing in the people who are oftentimes on the outside of the AIDS sort of core group, being white men. Lowery does a good job of giving space to the women that were involved, as well as giving a decent amount of time of the book dedicated to people of color who were involved in ACT UP as well as Grand Fury, specifically Robert Vasquez Pacheco. He was one of the members of Grand Fury, and he was kind of the token person of color in the group. But yeah, he gets a pretty decent amount of page time in this. But yeah, it was Vulgar and It Was Beautiful by Jack Lowery, and definitely give this a read if you want to learn more. So that is my little wrap-up. I enjoyed doing my last one, so I'm going to do probably one last one for the end of Pride Month, but that is all I have for you today. Hopefully some of these are interesting to you. If they are, let me know in the comments, and of course, I will see you again next time. And for the last week